You become a journalist because you believe in something. That sounds naive when you say it out loud, so you stop saying it out loud quickly. But it's true. You believe that information is power, and that power without accountability corrodes everything it touches, and that someone has to be the one who asks the questions nobody wants asked. You want to be that person. Level 1, the local paper. Your first job pays $31,000 a year. You cover city hall, school board meetings, zoning disputes, the occasional crime story. The newsroom has 11 people and smells like coffee and carpet that hasn't been replaced since 1994. Your editor is a woman named Diane who has been at the paper for 22 years and has an instinct for when a story is real and when it's noise that you will spend the rest of your career trying to replicate. You break a story in your second year. A city contractor has been billing the municipality for work that wasn't done. The evidence is in public documents that nobody had bothered to read carefully. You read them carefully. The story runs on a Tuesday. The contractor loses the contract. A city official resigns. You receive an email from a woman who says your story helped her understand why her neighborhood streets were never repaired despite the city claiming they had been. You frame that email, not literally but in your head. You go back to it when things get hard. You become a journalist because of moments like this. Information, properly deployed, changes things. Diane teaches you the rules. Confirm everything twice. Name your sources on record whenever possible. If a powerful person doesn't want something published, that's usually a sign it should be published. Never let access become dependency. The moment a source trusts you more than fears you, the relationship has flipped. You follow the rules. For a while. Level 2, the regional outlet. A digital news organization in the state capital offers you a job at $58,000. You cover the state house, legislation, lobbying, the political infrastructure that determines how public money moves and where it lands. The stories are bigger. The sources are more important. The relationships take longer to build and matter more once you have them. You learn about access journalism without calling it that. There are reporters who get the good stories and reporters who get the official press releases dressed up as stories. The difference between them isn't always talent, it's relationships. It's being trusted by the people you cover. It's being the reporter they call when they want something in the paper, and being the reporter they call when they want something out of it. You start being careful, not in the way Diane meant, in a different way. You're careful about which stories you push hard on and which ones you let develop slowly. You're careful about who you burn, because you understand now that burning a source feels like a victory and functions like a debt. You get one story and lose the next 4. A senior legislative aide tips you to a story about a budget manipulation that benefits a specific real estate developer. It's a good story. It runs. The developer is embarrassed. 3 months later, the same aide calls you with another tip. But this time, the tip points toward a story that would embarrass the aide's boss. You write it with less urgency. You do additional reporting that doesn't add much. The story runs 6 weeks later, smaller than it should have been, after the relevant legislative session has ended and the damage is contained. You don't think of this as corruption. You think of it as calibration. Level 3, the national publication. A magazine in New York brings you on as a staff writer. The salary is $94,000 plus expenses. Your work will be read by people who make decisions at a national level. The sources are CEOs, senators, cabinet secretaries. The access is extraordinary. The compromises required to maintain it are proportionally larger. You write a profile of a technology executive. He's given you unprecedented access. 18 hours of interviews over 3 months. His home, his office, his foundation in rural Kenya. The story you file is nuanced and reported, and honest about his contradictions. Your editor wants it sharper, more critical. The executive's communications team has read an early draft, which is not normal, and which you allowed because the access required it, and they've flagged 3 paragraphs they consider unfair. You negotiate. You keep 2 of the 3 paragraphs. You soften the 3rd. The story runs and it's good. Not the story you originally reported, but good. The executive sends you a handwritten note saying he appreciated the fairness. 6 months later, when he's involved in a regulatory dispute with the FTC, his communications director calls you first. You get the story. This is how it works now. This is what you've learned. The editors have their own pressures. The publication has advertisers. Not advertisers who directly influence coverage, nothing that crude, but advertisers who represent industries the publication writes about. Automotive companies, financial services firms, technology giants. When stories about those industries move through the editorial process, they move differently. Not because anyone issues directives, because people who want to keep their jobs develop an intuition for what their employer finds comfortable, and they apply that intuition before anyone has to ask them to. You develop the intuition. It feels like editorial judgment. It might be. You stop checking. Marcus joins the magazine as a staff writer the year you become a senior editor. He covered local politics in Ohio for 4 years. He has the energy you had at his level, and an instinct for accountability stories that reminds you of yourself before you learn to call it calibration. He files a story on a pharmaceutical company's lobbying relationships with senators on the health committee. It's well reported, well sourced, legally clean. The pharmaceutical company is a significant advertiser. You send it back for additional reporting. The additional reporting takes 3 weeks and adds 1 paragraph. By the time it runs, 2 of his 3 senators have left the committee and the story's news hook has expired. Marcus looks at you in a way that means he understands what happened. You look back in a way that means you remember when you would have looked at a senior editor the same way. Level 4, the platform. A digital media company offers you the editor-in-chief role. $240,000, a staff of 60 reporters, investors who want growth and scale and the kind of traffic that requires stories about things people want to read about rather than things people need to know. You tell yourself you'll protect the journalism. You tell yourself resources are what journalism needs, and resources require revenue, and revenue requires audience, and audience requires meeting people where they are. This is not wrong. It's also not the whole story. The investors want a seat at the editorial table, not a formal seat, nothing that would look bad if it came out, but a standing meeting where you discuss story priorities, where they ask questions about coverage decisions, where their concerns register in ways that influence what you assign and what you don't. You start the meeting. You tell yourself it's stakeholder management. You're gathering information. You're understanding the business context. Journalism doesn't exist without resources, and resources don't exist without trust from the people who provide them. A story comes in from one of your investigative reporters. A private equity firm, heavily backed by one of your major investors, has been systematically underfunding pension obligations at companies it acquires. There are documents, there are sources. The story is airtight. You assign it to a second reporter to confirm the findings, then a third. You add a fact-checking process that exceeds anything you've applied to previous investigations. The lawyer reviews it 4 times. Each round takes 3 weeks. The investor calls you twice to express concerns about the framing. You don't kill the story. You adjust the framing. You add context that softens the conclusions without technically altering the facts. The story runs 8 months after it was first filed. The private equity firm has completed 3 additional acquisitions by then. The pension irregularities are now in their past. You call this responsible journalism. You call it not publishing things you can't fully defend. You know what Diane would call it. Level 5, the consultant. You leave the editor-in-chief role after 4 years. The investors want different metrics. The staff wants a different kind of leadership. You want to stop having the same conversation in the same meeting room for the rest of your working life. The offers come quickly. Communications firms want your relationships. Corporations want your credibility. Political campaigns want your ability to speak the language of journalism from a position that technically isn't journalism. You know how news organizations work from the inside. You know what reporters respond to, what editors will run, what framing survives scrutiny, and what doesn't. You become a consultant, a strategic communications advisor. You help companies manage their narratives during difficult periods. Regulatory investigations, product failures, executive misconduct allegations. You don't call it spin. You call it earned media strategy, which is a phrase that means exactly the same thing without the connotation. You're good at this because you understand the other side. You know which reporters are reachable and how. You know which outlets will run your version of a story if you offer them access. You know how to feed information that steers coverage without appearing to steer it. You know how to make a journalist feel like they discovered something you intended for them to find. You have spent 22 years learning how news gets made. Now you use that knowledge to shape it from the outside. Your clients are companies that once feared coverage. They pay you to make sure that coverage never comes, or comes differently. Everything you do is legal. Everything is standard practice in your industry. every competitor does the same thing or worse. You read the news the way a mechanic watches a car drive. You can see the seams. You can see where a story came from, who fed it, whose interest it serves. Almost nothing you read feels like the kind of journalism you believed in when you were 24 and writing about city contractors and framing emails in your head. A reporter calls you for comment on a story about one of your clients. She's young, maybe 26, and she's found something real. You can tell from the questions she's asking. You give her a statement that's technically accurate and designed to redirect her attention. She pushes back, asks follow-up questions that show she hasn't redirected. You tell her the statement stands and end the call. Her name is not Marcus, but she asks questions the way Marcus did, and she pushes back the way you used to. And she is going to write the story, and it is going to be exactly the kind of story you used to believe was why the job existed. You will spend tomorrow morning managing the fallout. The job you have now could not exist without the career that preceded it. Every relationship, every credential, every piece of credibility you trade on was built during years when you believed you were doing something different. You needed to become a journalist to become what you are. You don't think of yourself as corrupt. Corrupt journalists fabricate quotes and take cash in envelopes. You've never done either. You've just learned, over 22 years and one decision at a time, to use the tools of accountability journalism in service of the people. Accountability journalism is supposed to hold accountable. The system doesn't need liars. It just needs people who know how stories get told.